Welcome back to Multi Marziali, everybody. This time we will talk about Savat, French boxing, many names. With me, there is Craig Gemeiner from Australia. He will talk about Savat and his experience. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Claudio. Thank you very much. Well, finally, we've got to meet and do this podcast at last.
Thanks for accepting my invitation. Okay, so let's start. I would like to know something about you first. How did you start martial arts, and your experience in Savat? How did you meet Savat?
Okay, sure. Well, with my martial art background, I first started in 1975, doing a little bit of kung fu here in Australia, and that's where I'm based, here on the Gold Coast, Australia. And I did that for about a year, so I was about around about 12 years old, and that was fun. And then I was introduced in 1976 to Taekwondo. That was the most popular martial art probably in Australia at the time. I got involved with that, and I did a lot of competition and at national level and international level. So I was competitive. I think I won the black belt division 3 times in my in the adult division. They used to put my age up. My instructor used to put the age up so I could compete against the adults. So that was an experience. But my Taekwondo instructor was actually a former boxing coach, a very high level coach. So in boxing, so we used to cross train in boxing, which was very good at the time. So from Taekwondo, I moved to kickboxing in about 1981. I wanted to experience that and fought in the PKA type competitions. So I enjoyed that. But I did realize that I was lacking in boxing coming from a Taekwondo background. So about 1983, I entered into boxing competition at and I was training at a club here on the Gold Coast, which was an excellent club. And that was a great education for me. And I competed on and off for about 4 years in boxing. And that lifted my game. That was very good. Around about 84, 85, I became interested in the Jeet Kune Do. I found that quite interesting, mainly for the Bruce Lee, and through Jeet Kune Do, also the Filipino martial arts. And that was good. I ended up doing a seminar in Australia about 83 with Dan Inasano, who's a lovely man, and also Larry Hartsell at the time. I found that was quite good. And then in 1985, I decided to travel to America to train at the Inasano Academy for about 3 weeks. I think that was about September 1985, and enjoyed that. It was good. I already had that background in kickboxing and boxing, and enjoyed that. And I was able to train with a few people there, which was good. But during that stay, I met and trained with a chap called Selemos Lee, who at the time was not an instructor, he was a student. But he was a very real gentleman, and he was kind enough to teach me. And I really gravitated towards the Savat, more so than the Jeet Kune Do and Kali. For me personally, I gravitated towards the Savat. And so when I came back to Australia, I was able to train for a period of 10 years with different instructors in Savat. Most of them were very good. They were very, very good people. I had 1 or 2 that weren't so good, but that happens. So I continued my Savat training. We had a lot of visitors from France and Europe coming through to Australia, so I made a point of training with them. And that was an important aspect of the training. During that time with Savat, I developed a really deep interest in Western fighting disciplines. So I started to also experience fencing, modern fencing, from about 1989. So I was doing Savat and modern fencing.
In Olympic?
Yeah, Olympic fencing. Olympic fencing. The foil, épée, and sabre was what we call it in English. I enjoyed that, and I trained under an excellent fencing master. and I competed a lot because I was very competitive. There were no Savat competitions in Australia, so I continued my Savat training, but also competed in fencing competition from 89 through to about 96. Yeah, so I was competing at national and state level, which I enjoyed very much. After that, I continued with my Savat up until about, I continued with the Savat, but during the late 90s, and 2000s, I got very interested in the combatives type movement. Particularly, I didn't train with this individual. I found Carl Sistari was very influential in the combatives area, and his students, Clint Sporman and Ralph Grasso, where I got to know those gentlemen through the internet. So there was another experience for me. So I've always enjoyed training and experiencing different combat arts. That's important to me. As much as I like teaching, I also enjoy being a student, but it's got to be the right teacher, someone who's at a very, very high level. That's important for me. And then through that journey of learning, I also got involved with catch as catch can wrestling, another Western combat discipline, which I always wanted to try. And 2010, I traveled to Japan to train at the Snake Pit Catch as Catch Can Club, Snake Pit Japan, originally opened by Billy Robinson, who's a legend in Catch as Catch Can wrestling, and Miyato-san, the Japanese instructor, who opened up the club there. And I really, really enjoyed that. And for about 5 years, I would go backwards and forwards to Japan each year to train, sometimes twice a year, to train for a couple of weeks at the Snake Pit Japan Club. And then I would also do amateur wrestling here in Australia from about 2010 to 2015. So I tend to, if I enjoy something, I tend to immerse myself into it properly and try to learn it as much as I can, as opposed to doing maybe a seminar here or a seminar there. So
it's a common habit. People go to the seminars and then they start a group and start to teach, more than people that will go really in deep every martial arts, or just a couple of that. It's a common evil.
Yes. Yeah, it is, unfortunately. But to me, it's important to, if you have an appreciation of it, you really have to do it properly. But but it's important if you want to learn it, immerse yourself in it as best you can. And these days you can do online courses with instructors. Like, for instance, while I'm still doing the Savat and teaching my students, I'm also still today being a student. Another system that I really enjoy is a stand-up system called Ghost Elusive Combat, which is developed by Phil Norman and is spearheaded by Jake Clark, his protege. And I've been doing that since 2020, online Zoom classes. So there's no excuse that if you want to experience something, that you can actually still train, even though you're thousands of kilometers away. You can still train if you search it out. And training with Jake Clark in this Ghost system is great. Jake is he'd be half my age, but he's a very experienced coach. I'm happy with Phil's approach, and as I mentioned before, though, it's very important that you just getting back to being a student as much as an instructor. Your coaches have to be really, in my opinion, high level. So, for instance, in Savat, I've had the experience of being coached by world, European, and French champions, and they should be acknowledged. People like Sebastian Guthrie, Frank Moran, Manuel Tardis, Yassine. And it doesn't matter, I'll be coached by male or female. My female Canne de Combat coach. Canne de Combat is the sister art to Savat, the French cane fencing. And Nicole Holzman, who is 2 times world champion. She was a gold medalist at the recent World Combat Games. She's great. I've had the chance to personally train with her twice when she came to Australia. and she's actually quite phenomenal as a coach. So I've been very, very lucky that I've had very good coaches. They're very, apart from being exceptional teachers and passing those skills along at a high level, they're actually nice people. They're not toxic, and that's always a bonus. So I'm very fortunate that way to meet good people in this game. And I think, you know, people look at the Savat and all these other disciplines that I've mentioned, and they, you know, people who don't do martial arts, and they probably think it's just fighting and bashing, but there's a lot to be learnt from it. There's a lot of interaction with really amazing people, and that'll guide you through ways and have their own little philosophy on the way they approach things. So there's much to be learnt, I think.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us something about the story of Savat?
Oh, the history?
Yep, the history.
Okay. Now, just remember, the Savat history is massive. It's very, very massive. And also, when it comes to the history, I'm not the pinnacle of all knowledge. So what I'll do is I'll just touch on the Savat, because there's the Savat history. I'll just touch on. You could talk for hours and hours upon it, but I'll just touch briefly on it, so you get a general idea of it. It won't be an in-depth discussion, but basically we know that late 1700s, early 1800s, there was the La Savat, which was primarily open hand strikes, almost slapping, low kicks, some Canne introduced as well, and also some lutte or wrestling, French wrestling. It was basic, and a lot of the people would use this to settle arguments too. So if you, instead of dueling with the sword, which became banned, people would settle arguments through doing La Savate, which would be like a duel, and there would be rules. Maybe the first person who sort of gave up or got knocked to the ground, it would stop and the argument would be settled. So it was a dueling form as well. It could be used for self-defense. That, and also Le Canne was used as well. So you had that system, and one of the most well-known masters or instructors, or professors as it's often termed, Savat instructors are referred to as professor. One of the most well-known was Michel Pissot. He was an instructor who taught a number of wealthy and politicians, playwrights. He was involved with teaching these individuals Savat. And you've got to remember, back then it was, combat sports were enjoyed by all sorts of people of all sorts of society. It's a little bit different today. So yeah, and he, Michel Pissot, had a student, Lecour, Charles Lecour, I believe it was, who had a brother, Herbert Lecour, I believe. And his student, Lecour, would actually end up traveling to England to learn le boxe anglaise, or English boxing, and he enjoyed that. He could see that it was a systemized style, and he thought, well, and he came back to France and he integrated English boxing with La Savate. And he would later, the kicks would be lifted from low kicks, because La Savate was mainly low kicks, but later on kicks would be lifted to include midline kicks and head kicks, and gloves would also be used. And so you went from being a more street fighting art to more a sport, a combat sport that could be trained safely. And during that time, Canne and Baton was still used, and the self-defense aspects were still included with the lutte, the wrestling, which was important, but it became more systemized. I believe later some other small elements of Chasson later were integrated in the Savat as well. Now, Chasson was the southern method of exercising, less a self-defense method, more a fitness method used by sailors in southern France, I must say. And so you had now the Savat would also become known as later as Le Boxe Française, French boxing. And it was uniquely French. Now the Le Cours system was still quite practical. And then you had, again, I'm not going to go in depth with the history because we'd be here all night or all day, and I'll probably bore everyone to death. So then you started to also have other individuals such as Chalemont, Joseph and his son Charles, who would have their own sort of development of Savat, and they would write manuals on it. There's quite a few manuals printed on the subject of French boxing. It's quite well documented from, I think, from the mid 1800s. So it's very systemized. It's very systemized. And the Chalemont method would use the arm extensions where they throw the arms out when they kick. There was very much a academic, what we call an academic system, and a sportive system. So you had those that approach to it. Moving along, there was actually mixed matches between French boxing. As I said, I'll sometimes use the term Savat to describe French boxing because, as I mentioned, Savat is a general term used today to describe all the disciplines of the system. But Savat French boxing, there were mixed matches during the late 1800s between English boxers and French boxers, and that was always quite interesting. And that would have an influence on French boxing. They'd have to change things to keep up with the English boxers, because the French boxers would not always win. Now, that's the French. When I say that, it's not because the French boxing wasn't practical. It's the way they trained it. Like in English boxing, they worked rounds and contact, and they had the KO system. With French boxing, it was done more like fencing, where you would do light touches, and when you touch someone, you would have to acknowledge that touch with touche, and the referee would stop the bout and acknowledge, okay, you've, like in modern fencing or Olympic fencing,
yeah, like semi-contact, that kind of competition.
Yeah, that's right. So you didn't have this continuity all the time. So the French, I think, really learnt from that. So there was a change in the system to accommodate that and to try to win against English boxers, which is very interesting. During the late 1800s, early 1900s, we also see the problem with youth gangs called the Apache, and these were youth gangs that would cause a lot of problems. And so we had some French instructors, French boxing instructors such as Renan and Emile Andre and Joseph Renan, who were Savat instructors and also fencing instructors. They would simplify the methods, make it less sportive, and go back to the street origins and mix in things like knife work to a certain degree, lots of small stick and lacan, and make it more street orientated to combat the French Apache. They would actually write manuals on this as well. So, and again, like most French sports and most French things, the French are brilliant at systemizing and writing and documenting their art, which is really good. And so these French instructors of the early 1900s who developed their own little systems called Défense dans la rue, which is a form of street Savat, I guess. They published a lot of really good manuals on the subject, so we can see that development. So we're moving along now, and during World War I and World War II, we lost a lot of Savat professors that were killed during the wars, which is very unfortunate. And then after World War II, we have Count Baruzzi, who would bring it back, bring the Savat back from its very low numbers and promote it. And he did a great job. And another really interesting personality was Roger Lafon. He has a Lafon system. He was also very important to bring Savat back, French boxing back to the masses. So we still see by the early 1970s with the Savat competition, we still see a lot of the arm extensions being used in competition, though the rounds were more like boxing now, and you could have more knockouts and TKOs. By about the late 1970s, these arm extensions were dropped because they were found not to be less efficient. Instead, they had this close guard held into the body while kicking, which allowed you to punch easier and quicker from your kicking. And also you weren't open to counterattacks. That's not to say it's not bad. It's just that these arm extensions were used in that more fencing point system, where
I remember the old photos with the guard really long.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so that basically got dropped. It just didn't stand up to this new approach, which is all about continuous movement and combinations. And so the older system started to disappear, but luckily we have the Lafon system, as I mentioned, Professor Lafon. It's still going today. It's being promoted by several of his students, and it's very important. It's almost like a national treasure in that it's a throwback. It's a time capsule of how it was done. So it's that's important that is kept so people can see how it's done. When you look at English boxing, the old styles completely disappeared because English boxing used to have wrestling and it used to have its own weaponry system. It's completely gone now. But Savat Savat French boxing is really interesting because both the French Federation of Savat and the International Savat Federation, they have kept the weaponry system of Savat and the associated disciplines. So now today Savat is a multidisciplinary sport or discipline. So you have, as I mentioned, you have Savat French boxing, which is the sport, the modern sport. And within the modern sport, you have two categories. You have combat, which is full contact. And like modern boxing, you have, you can win by points, TKO or KO knockout. And generally that's from 18, I believe it's 18 years you have to be to go into combat. I could be wrong there. But you can do that throughout your career. But once you hit 45 years of age, you must stop. You're not permitted to do it because, your reflexes start to slow down just a little bit. And you get a little bit older, you know how it is. And maybe your sight's not as good. But which it's a smart way of doing it because, brain damage, you don't want to get too much of that. But what you can do is once you finish combat, you can do assault. And assault is light contact or semi-contact. And assault is good because, as I mentioned, once you finish combat or you don't want to do it and it's too hard, you can go to assault. Or if you're just not strong enough and you don't even want to do full contact, you can do assault competition. I can still do assault today in competition. I still compete in Japan when I can, when my body allows me to. And assault is judged similar to combat, full contact, but it's different in that you do more in assault, you do more kicks, about 80 to 90% kicking in assault, 20 to 10% punching. And that's because you get more points for kicking in assault. But in combat, the Savat full contact competition, it's more 60% kicking and, 40% kicking and 60% punching. So it's a little bit different that way. So, and assault allows children to compete as well without sustaining, brain damage. It's very controlled and very disciplined. And if we go from, say, the Savat now, and we talk about the sister art of Savat, which is the weaponry disciplines, which is Canne de Combat, which is the French cane fencing or cane fighting, and that's pretty much judged on the same level of assault. You can't knock anyone out with a stick, but you score with points, and it's done over 3 rounds, generally over 3 rounds of 2 minutes with a 1 minute break. So combat's done the same. Combat can be 3 to 5 minute rounds with a 1 minute break, and same with assault. The Canne is the same, and you wear a fencing mask with a coif to protect the head. You wear a jacket, a padded jacket, and long padded pants and a shin guard and special gloves.
Can you still kick while you compete in Cannes? You can kick also?
Look, yes, you can, but that's a separate, another category, another module of Canne de Combat. When you do Canne de Combat competition, no kicking, but we have what we call Canne Chasson. And
okay.
Canne Chasson is done less for competition. It's more something you spar and enjoy. So you still do the Canne de Combat rules, plus you can do this French boxing kicks. And that's really interesting. It's really interesting. And then on top of that, you can do double Canne double, where you use 2 canes using Canne de Combat skills, and you can have a lot of fun with that. So there's quite a few things going. And within the La Canne module, you also have Canne Défense, which is the French self-defense system using a cane. So you can, that's not a sport, that's done purely for self-defense, if that makes sense. So now the other modules within Savat today, particularly within the International Savat Federation and the French Federation, is Savat Défense, which is the self-defense method of Savat. It's a modernized system that still includes portions of the older traditional methods of Savat, such as the open hand hits and low kicks, knees and elbows, headbutts and ground fighting, but taught in a modern context. So so Savat Défense is the self-defense aspect. And also you have, going back to the weaponry, I forgot to mention, but you also have Le Baton, which is the French 2-handed long stick. So you have the federal method, which is a more modernized system developed by Morissari, and then you have the Joinville method, which has been brought back, a more historical method. Yeah, so that's quite comprehensive. So within that same module again, we've got Savat form, which is a type of Savat sport aerobics. So you can do that. And so as you can see, it's very, very comprehensive. Savat is very comprehensive today in what you can learn. Everything's systemized. There's a syllabus for everything that we do today in Savat. Yeah.
Historically, do you think it's something? It has something to do with the Oriental martial arts? It can be influenced one by the other one. You know, there is a famous video, I think, by Jesse Eckkamp. Maybe he speaks about the influence of French boxing on karate. It's not the contrary.
Yeah. Look, it's hard to say. I was in Japan, I think it was around about 2007. I went to Yokohama to I think there was a state library there, or a very high level library, and I was able to access historical documents. There's a heavy French influence there that was stationed there. And I did find French manuals in the library, but they were covering things like bayonet, and I didn't find anything on French boxing in these manuals. Joinville method is a military method. It's a military school that taught French boxing and Canne and a number of other disciplines, fencing, and apparently, yeah. But I never saw any. I never saw any French boxing manuals at that library. Not on. I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say if Savat has influenced historical Asian martial arts. And on the flip side, I don't think personally that looking at our historical French boxing manuals, I really don't think Asian martial arts influenced Savat. I believe that Count Beruzzi once said that possibly Asian martial arts did influence Savat, but I think he was just trying to be nice to the Judo Federation at the time. and trying to keep everybody happy. But we have manuals going right back, I think, really to the early 1800s that show Savat and French boxing development along with Canne. So I don't see why Europeans, Westerners could not have developed their own martial arts that incorporate kicking.
Sure.
I don't see why not. So, but that's a really good question.
I play and teach Filipino, but we know that many books talks about the influence of European fencing on Filipino systems. So many things come from Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and France. The sword system were really heavy here. So many people also from the Philippines are starting to write books about this, the historical influence of the European fencing. So it's full. We have so many things here in Europe, but in the 70s, the Oriental martial arts came in, and everybody started to play that. But we had boxing that influenced Thai and many other things, and many systems from the Far East now has some boxing techniques inside of it because they are really efficient.
Yes,
so you were exposed in kickboxing and Savat. Can you tell us the difference for you? What did you see the difference? The roundhouse kick and the fouette is the name of the roundhouse. That
very good.
How do you say that one is fouette? It's not roundhouse from the kickboxing. That one is the chassé. It's not the side kick. How can you say the difference? How do you feel that there is some difference between the two arts?
Okay, that's good. That's a good question. This is the big difference. Okay, this is the shoe, the chasseur, the shoe or the Savat boot is the big difference. So this is as you can see, it has it looks like a wrestling boot or a boxing boot. It's not. It's much denser. It's still light, but it's much denser. It's hard on the toe, which is this portion here, and this area here can be used to impact the target. So looking at the shoe, that changes everything. So in Savat, because you wear a shoe and you can only use the shoe and not the shin to impact, so that it's a shoe fighting or a boot fighting art and not a shin kicking art. And because of that, we are able to lift our kicks into what we call an arme position or a chamber position, which gives us great precision and great control when we deliver the kick, and as opposed to swinging it as hard as we can, for instance, and we can do as much damage because the point of percussion is this toe, and it's generated into a smaller area. So if I want to kick behind the guard, I can use this boot to hit behind the guard in the throat or in the eye, and that is quite devastating. And we can also hit in between the guard in the xiphoid process or the floating ribs, and so we don't have to swing it hard. We can whip, which is what fouette means. We can whip the kick in, get it out, do the damage, and then follow up with further combinations, as opposed to throwing one big shot and then another big shot. We can go boom, 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 boom. So you can, just by the way I'm talking, you can see the difference in cadence. The rhythm is more continuous in Savat. That's not to put down any other art. I'm just saying that's simply how we do it. So this makes a big difference, and because, as I mentioned before, you can only hit with the boot, not the shin. So, and if you're not, also we in the chassé is like a side kick, I guess, but we do more arme. We use it a lot, especially in assault, but if you can still use it in combat as well. So the chassé is another good kick, and also and with Savat, people who sort of haven't trained Savat often they look at it and they go, oh, that looks like taekwondo or karate. And that's not to put those arts down, or kickboxing. But once you train it properly under a proper instructor, I don't mean a seminar, I mean under a good instructor over time, you soon understand that superficially it might look like those other arts, but once you get a better understanding, it's different. It's different. Not in a, I'm not saying it's better, but it's different. You have things like, well, first of all, you must kick in a certain way in Savat. You can't, there's certain ways you can't kick. You'll be warned or disqualified. And these kicks go back to Chalimont. It's sort of based on a modified version of the old Chalimont system. So if you do a fouette, the round kick, it has to be delivered primarily against a horizontal, along a horizontal plane. It can't come up diagonal. The chassé must be delivered in a piston type action. And you can't kick with the shins. So there's a lot of difference in kicks, and it's important that you do it right, because if you don't, as I mentioned, you will be warned in competition, and if you still don't do it right, you'll have points taken off, and eventually you'll be disqualified. So that's one aspect that's a big difference. The other aspect is the distance. The distance and the control of distance. The ring craft or carrage is carrage. Excuse my French, it's not very good, but the ring craft is really important. The principles of hitting without being hit. That's another aspect of it as well. So there's a lot of things going on within the art. The footwork, what we call décalage and débordement, which you would find in the Filipino martial arts too, stepping off on an angle and delivering hits, flanking the opponent and moving away.
When I watch some Savat match, or also just training, one of the things that I see more, it's the angle step, the décalage. It's really there. It's really there because I come from kickboxing, and when I see some kickboxing video, it's not so automatic to see that kind of movements, that kind of angles. In Savat, it's always there. They always hit from a good angle, good for them, not good for the opponent. And this is one of the things I really liked.
Yes, it's a very smart system. See, English boxing or boxing has always been referred to as the sweet science. You've probably heard this term. Well, in Savat French boxing or Boxe Française, it's always been referred to as the educative system. The educative system. So it's a very smart, like you just mentioned, a very smart way of training, a very smart way of competing in that aspect. So it's there's a and as I mentioned, generally the code of conduct is very different too. Like when we go into the ring, we don't bow, but we salute. And when we go into the competition ring, we salute the judges, we salute the fighter and the judge delegate. So we do that. So there's a difference as well. You don't see that. We don't in the Savat competition, we don't have this smack talk, this talk before the competition of putting people down. In fact, when you're competing, if your corner yells out too much, the referee will tell them to be quiet. They have to be quiet. That's important. And also during competition, if the crowd gets crazy, the crowd gets out of hand, the referee can, take action as well. So it really does encompass the Olympic values as well. The International Savat Federation, its president, Julia Gabriel, is doing a great job. Is always pushing for the this ethics within French boxing. It has that. So I really enjoy that aspect, because if it was like the MMA, which is really great to watch, but the subculture itself is something I'm not fussed on, and you sort of see it in some of the other combat disciplines. Savat really doesn't have that. If it did, I wouldn't be involved with it. So I really enjoy that sportsmanship, if I can say it like that. That's part of the system. I think that's Something I forgot to mention also is that there's an introduction probably in the last 7 years of a new Savat type of competition called Savat Pro, which is Savat promotional. It's where the fighters get paid, and it was developed so that fighters who wanted to try and get an income from Savat, that was provided for, but also it was developed, Savat Pro was developed for other kickboxing disciplines such as Muay Thai or K1 or American style kickboxing to come into Savat Pro and try to do that. There are modified rules in Savat Pro to help kickboxers get involved. For instance, in Savat Pro, you can block with the shin. In normal Savat, you are not permitted to block with the shin. We use déplacement and we use esquive. We use different ways of avoiding a low kick. We don't block with the shin. But in Savat Pro, to accommodate kickboxers and other people who really rely on the shin block, Savat Pro allows the shin blocks. But other than that, you still must wear the chasseur or the Savat boot. You wear the long pants, but you don't wear because Pro, you don't wear a singlet. You don't wear a singlet now. So, and there's boxing gloves, and it's same rules as combat. So that's proved to be quite popular, but it's a modified form of Savat that has been facilitated to let other kickboxers become involved. And that's starting to prove quite popular, particularly in China at one stage. There was a lot of Savat Pro. So, yeah.
Craig, there was a match. I think maybe in beginning of the 90s, there was this match between Ramon Decker and François Pernacchio. Did you see that?
Oh yes, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's you see, it's on YouTube. It's Italian. The comment is in Italian.
Okay.
And it was my recording from my TV when I was really young. I recorded that. I put that on my channel. Then I canceled it. The comment is in Italian, and there is a little problem with the with some lines that appears down the video. And
oh wow.
that match was fantastic. It was, I think, the rules were Thai or K1, I think.
I think they were K1. I think they were more like maybe WKA. I don't think there were elbows or knees. Not that particular fight.
No knees. But it was fantastic. The way Pernacchio used to turn around. Ramon Decker is Ramon Decker. It's not so easy to see. Ramon Decker has some hard times like that. And he used to move all the time. And when Ramon Decker used to give the roundhouse kick, there was the sweep every time. He fell on the ground 5-6 times, I think, in the match. It was fantastic. One of my teachers many years ago said for him that was the best demonstration of what Jeet Kune Do should be. It was not.
Well,
but the way to fight, the way to adapt to Ramon Decker from François Pernacchio was perfect.
That's very interesting that you said that. I think Savat is at its best when you're up against a walk-up fighter, because no matter what style, because as I previously mentioned, you can do déplacement, which is the footwork moving around with the ring craft and using things like décalage and débordement. You can use all these things, and then we talked about the combinations, the continuity of the constant combinations coming with Savat. So when you have all that, it makes for a really, really interesting art. It's like chess. It's like Billy Robinson, a great catch wrestling coach, once said that catch wrestling is like physical chess, but I think Savat is also like physical chess. where you're placing movements. And I don't play chess, but I do play physical chess. So I personally, that's what I love about Savat. It really is that it's a thinking person's combat sport. And if plan A doesn't work, you go to plan B. If plan B doesn't work, you go to plan C. And that's what I think Savat allows. But if you only know one way of fighting, that's not always a good way, especially if your opponent is really tough, like Decker. The legend Decker. You've got to have a plan B. And the French fighter, who is brilliant, had that plan B and C. So so that's really interesting that that was your video.
Yeah. Craig, do you want to add something more about some specific details of the art?
Oh, sure. Well, it's like I mentioned, it's got a really interesting history. I'm involved with Canne and Le Baton, trying to promote it here in Australia, and the Savat. It's not very popular, unfortunately. We've got things like the MMA and the Muay Thai and the BJJ that's much more popular.
Yeah.
But we still try to promote it. Outside of Europe, it tends to be quite small. But in Japan, it's there's a small group, but they're pushing it. And we don't have competitions in Australia, but we go to Japan to compete at the Tokyo Open, which is always fun. I enjoy competing in that one. Nori-san promotes that tournament. He does a great job, and we have fighters coming around. We have clubs in New Caledonia also. Yeah, so it's quite, and Taiwan, there's a small club there. They're doing a great job trying to promote us. All that little region, we're trying to get it going. It's small, but it's a tight group. It's a tight little group that looks after each other. So the Savat people are generally very close. They look after each other and support each other for the most part, which is so it means
nice.
Less politics. Particularly outside of France, there's less politics in Savat, which is really nice. We have French visitors that come here we train with them when they're here, and it's good. So, but for me personally, I try to promote it as much as I can. I give a lot of information out on my websites. I have several. Also on Facebook, I try to feed a little bit of information. I've produced DVDs on the subject back in the mid 2000s. I produced DVDs for Paladin Press, which was an American company.
Everything Craig is talking about, it's below this video, this podcast, in the description. You see everything also down there.
Oh, thank you. I also enjoy teaching the Vinny method of Lacan so I like promoting things that are a little bit different, a little bit Western based. So together with Ralph Grasso back in the early 2000s, we were promoting the Vinny method of Lacan. That's another method of Lacan, which most people know as Batitsu. I promoted several DVDs, and I have a website on that. So the history is really quite fascinating, and it's modern development. So I think it's got a lot to offer in that regard. And it'll be very interesting to see the way it goes, because sometimes things do full circle, don't they? You see MMA with its grappling. Who knows? One day we might see even the wrestling come back into Savat. There's all sorts of things, but I think what I'm really impressed is with the French and International Savat federations. They're very progressive. They try things. They experiment with different approaches. So it really is ongoing, and there's a lot to pick up. In fact, sometimes it's hard to keep up with what's available. So there is quite a bit available. But I think one of the most important things, though, is to put the time and effort into learning the skills properly. You would know this with the Filipino martial arts. From your perspective, you can watch a DVD or a video of someone doing something, and you can tell, probably in the system that you do, and you can tell straight away, okay, this person's had a few months training, or this person's had decades of training. It's the same with Savat. So it's really important that you seek out a really good instructor, and there's no excuses these days. You can do Zoom classes with different instructors around the world. There's several offering in America. There's in the UK. I'm offering training Zoom classes in Australia for those who are interested. So there's if you really want to learn Savat and make the effort, I think it's all available. It's like the Filipino martial arts. They can, you seek it out and it's there. But be truthful to yourself, and I think that's important. Be truthful to yourself and what you know and what you don't know, and you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
How do you see the future of Savat? Do you think it will be more famous? It will spread out more than in the last years?
Really good question. Really good question. Look, with the work done with the International Savat Federation, they're working hard to push it. I think in Europe, it's really, you have the World Championships in assault every 2 years, and they have a lot of countries coming over to fight in Europe in that one. I think they have between 30 and 40 countries that travel. And same with a combat level, full contact. They have the World Championships every 2 years. Canne Combat has it every 2 years, their competition. It's going well there, it seems. I think it's a bit of a disappointment what's going on in America. We have, from what I can tell, there's an enthusiastic group of Savat people, but for some reason there's no competitions. I think one of the reasons is that most of the Savat practitioners are Jeet Kune Do people, and there seems to be a little bit of tension between Jeet Kune Do groups. Maybe that's the problem, and they're not coming together and organising competitions in Savat, because it seems to be a lot of silver gloves who are not competing.
Jeet Kune Do in the JKD community.
Yeah, I'm not part of the Jeet Kune Do community. I dabbled in it back in the early 80s, but we don't have that problem in the Savat groups. We all sort of know what we're doing and which directions we're going. But it's a shame, because America could be the USA could be the forerunners or on the forefront of promoting Savat. I mean, like, look at MMA I know there is I know there is a small.
John Bon Jones used something from Savat also.
Yeah.
And also in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee, it was just notes. So he didn't write the books, but it's some notes that were brought for the public by someone else, by Linda Lee and another name, I don't remember who. But it's full of also drawers about the coup de pied bas, the chassé, and many other things from Savat. It speaks about Savat also. So also in the JKD community, people knew something about Savat, but that maybe at that time, who knew in the USA in the 70s?
Yes. Yeah. Well, during the 80s in the USA, the French Federation sent a team over to promote Savat in California, and also I believe in Chicago. And it seemed to be moving ahead, and then it sort of had its time, and then it's sort of gone quiet, I think, because of MMA. But you mentioned people like Jones in MMA using a lot of the Savat, like the sidekick or the chassé and the chassé frontal or kubi bar. Yeah, and what I like watching about MMA visually is that the top fighters are always moving now, and they're not standing still. They can't afford it, because someone will shoot in with a single or a double leg, so they're moving with a lot of footwork, and they're throwing things like this, the chassé lateral, the side kick, and it's really interesting to watch. They're working off a jab, and again, it's what I like about MMA. It's sort of simplified the arts. It's simplified the Muay Thai. You see a little bit of simplified Savat in it, a little bit of simplified boxing and simplified catch wrestling and BJJ and all the rest of it. But it does seem that MMA fighters could really learn a lot from Savat French boxing, and I mean a lot. And they are starting to gravitate. I know Jerome Huon, who's an elite coach in France, is coaching a lot of MMA, a number of MMA fighters in Europe, and he's doing and I can see that they're being influenced by that. So it will be interesting to see the way Savat goes in the future. I think social media has helped Savat a lot because it puts it out there and it generates an interest. So we're all a tight knit group. We try to help each other, and we try. It's really good that way. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I think it can only go forward because it has, as I mentioned earlier, so much to offer on not only the tactical aspect, but the educational aspect as well. So, kids can do it. The kids can do it. Teenagers, adults, the young at heart, and the ladies can do it. If you don't want to do Savat, you can do La Canne. You don't want to do Canne or French boxing, you can do Savat Défense. So there's a lot of things available. So we'll just see how it goes. Hopefully forward.
Okay. Craig, I would like to thank you for coming. If you want to add something, if you want to give us some info, the names, your channels on YouTube, if you have an Instagram profile, you can say that, and everything is written also below, as I said before.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
How can we collect info about you on internet? Can you tell us some details?
Certainly. Okay. If you go on the internet, you can type in either my name or Gemeiner Academy of Savat. If you go on YouTube, just type in Gemeiner Savat Academy and you'll find me. Instagram, just Craig Gemeiner or Savat Australia. Also on Facebook, we have Savat Australia, which is with the logo of the green and gold logo. We have Gemeiner Savat Academy on Facebook and Craig Gemeiner on Facebook. So I can be contacted that way. So we're sort of out there. We try to promote it as much as possible. And also, another shameless plug. I've also got the Bootfighter Catalogue, which I have my videos available for streaming. If people are interested in the older systems, as I mentioned earlier, Bini, Défense dans la Rue, we have that available. So but I'd throw that in as well.
So people, if you want to go to Australia for a vacation or for training, you know where, you know the man. Okay. Craig, thanks again. Thanks for accepting my invitation, and thanks again for coming and tell us about the Savat, the beautiful art of Savat.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it, and I hope I didn't ramble on for too long. I hope that people will get something out of your great podcast. It's really good.
Thank you, and stay with us also next time. Thanks again. Thanks, Craig. Thanks everybody for listening to us. See you next time. Bye. Thank you.